everybody. Welcome to Chapter 2, the reading of Nonviolent Communication, a Language of Life by Marshall B. Rosenberg, PhD. My name is Jenna Lemire. I am not a professional reader. I am just somebody that is hosting some workshops and stuff through a organization called brightanddark.org, which is a shadow work resource center. And it specializes a lot in teaching new brooms or people who identify as witches or are wanting to practice witchcraft. It is also set up for just any magical practitioner, anybody that is newly awakened on their path and are looking for a way to be more empowered and deliberate about the things that they create in their lives. So in other words, you don't have to be a witch. You could be a starseed. You don't have to be a starseed. You can be completely not identified, but interested in being a deliberate creator and being empowered to be a part of the group. So if you're looking for a support group, you can check out brightanddark.org. If you already have found this because you're in brightanddark.org, I am doing these here because we found it of high value, this book, and are wanting to use it to help support the members in the community, and anybody that holds a role going forward in the company will need to know about nonviolent communication because it's that important. And there's a lot of neurodivergent people that are in the group, including myself, and the founder of Bright and Dark is also neurodivergent. So we like to do as many ways that we can accommodate the different types of neurotypes and stuff that are out there. Some people aren't good at reading or don't like reading. Some people really like to be read to. Some people really need like what's called parallel play, where they can get motivated to do something if someone else's energy is sort of helping them along. And so I am reading these books as a just an invitation for those who may be better read to, or may want to have something on in the background and still be engaged and feel like they're reading the book, but aren't just really a big physical book person. So if that is the case, then you are in the right place. But just know also, I'm not a big book reader and I stumble over words, and this is just kind of like me doing for fun. Okay, so Chapter 2, this one is called Communication That Blocks Compassion. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. For as you judge others, you will yourself be judged. This is a quote from the Holy Bible, Matthew 7:1. So take that in however you want to. I am a really big person about not throwing a lot of babies out with the bathwater and seeing that any type of situation, doctrine, message, and anything, that there's several different perspectives that we can take it on. So it's certainly good advice, no matter where it comes from, not to judge others, or lest we would be judged ourselves. Anyway, moving on. In studying the question of what alienates us from our natural state of compassion, I have identified specific forms of language and communication that I believe contribute to our behaving violently toward each other and ourselves. I use the term life-alienating communication to refer to these forms of communication. I'm going to highlight that. Life-alienating communication. And in the other chapter, I had also, I think, highlighted what they were calling life enriching. So life alienating and life enriching are two ways to look at this stuff. Okay. Moralistic judgments. One kind of life alienating communication is the use of moralistic judgments that imply wrongness or badness on the part of people who don't act in harmony with our values. Such judgments are reflected in language such as, the problem with you is that you're too selfish. She's lazy. They're prejudiced. It's inappropriate. Blame, insults, put downs, labels, criticism, comparisons, and diagnoses are all forms of judgment. Oh my God, did my life change when I actually started seeing that, and then seeing those things also as violent. It was like, what? But we're going to get into it more. So if part of you is like, wait a minute, I do those things, and you're feeling like shame or whatever, me too. I felt that way too. And yet I didn't just like push it away. I want to be better, and I want to be more compassionate. And that's why we're here. So let's look at it together, and it's okay, however you're feeling. The Sufi poet Rumi once wrote, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." Oh, I just got goosebumps. I love Rumi. Look at this, is a stim. This is autistic stimming. And I used to not do it. I would mask and stop. But right now I'm feeling very excited by that quote. And I want to do this with my hand. So you get to see me unmasking my autism. Woo! Okay. And there's a couple little things on the side of this here in like gray that say, first is certain ways of communicating alienate us from our natural state of compassion is one of the things. And then in the world of judgments, our concern centers on who is what. Ooh, interesting. Who is what? Yes. So we're still focusing on the who is what and what they're doing, and not on our inner experience, to the detriment of our inner child and our own emotions. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, so life alienating communication, however, traps us in a world of ideas about rightness and wrongness, a world of judgments. It is a language rich with words that classify and dichotomize people and their actions. When we speak this language, we judge others and their behavior while preoccupying ourselves with who's good, bad, normal, abnormal, responsible, irresponsible, smart, ignorant, etc. Long before I reached adulthood, I learned to communicate in an impersonal way that did not require me to reveal what was going on inside of myself. When I encountered people or behaviors I either didn't like or didn't understand, I would react in terms of their wrongness. If my teachers assigned a task that I didn't want to do, and they were mean or they were unreasonable. If someone pulled out in front of me in traffic, my reaction would be, "You idiot." When we speak this language, we think and communicate in terms of what's wrong with others for behaving in certain ways, or occasionally what's wrong with ourselves for not understanding or responding as they would like. Our attention is focused on classifying, analyzing, and determining levels of wrongness rather than on what we and others need and are not getting. Thus, if my partner wants more affection than I'm giving her, she is needy and dependent. But if I want more affection than she is giving me, then she is aloof and insensitive. If my colleague is more concerned about details than I am, he is picky and compulsive. On the other hand, if I am more concerned about details than he is sloppy and disorganized. Sound familiar? We've all been there, right? And analysis of others are actually expressions of our own needs and values. Oh, analysis of others are actually expressions of our own needs and values. It is my belief that all such analysis of other human beings are tragic expressions of our own values and needs. They are tragic because when we express our values and needs in this form, we increase defensiveness and resistance to them among the very people whose behaviors are of concern to us. Or if they do agree to act in harmony with our values because they concur with our analysis of their wrongness, then they will likely do so out of fear, guilt, and shame. Oh my God, that's so true. We all pay dearly when people respond to our values and needs, and not out of our desire to give, not out of the desire to give from the heart, but out of fear, guilt, or shame. Sooner or later, we will experience the consequences of diminished goodwill on the part of those who comply with our values out of a sense of either external or internal coercion. They too pay emotionally, for they are likely to feel resentment and decrease self-esteem when they respond to us out of fear, guilt, and shame. Furthermore, each time others associate us in their minds with any of those feelings, we decrease the likelihood of their responding compassionately to our needs and values in the future. It is important here not to confuse value judgments and moralistic judgments. All of us make value judgments as to the qualities that we value in life. For example, we may value honesty, freedom, or peace. Value judgments reflect back our beliefs of how life can be best served. We make moralistic judgments of people and behaviors that fail to support our value judgments. Violence is bad. People who kill others are evil. Had we been raised speaking a language that facilitated the expression of compassion, we would have learned to articulate our needs and values directly rather than to insinuate wrongness when they have not been met. For example, instead of violence is bad, we might say instead, I'm fearful of the use of violence to resolve conflicts. I value the resolution of human conflicts through other means. Oh, do you see that? Do you see the taking responsibility for it? Because if we're just like looking and being like, I hate violence, this is a stupid way to solve stuff, violence is dumb, then we're actually in reactivity, we're pushing against the violence in an essence in a law of attraction-based universe, creating sort of more of it because of our support with our focus. If we're able to take it, bring it in and be like, what is it that I'm valuing here? How can I advocate and own this myself? And then how can I look for a nice request in my own needs about it? You can still have your own needs, of course, but we can't expect everyone to meet our own needs because everybody has free will. At least that's my little commentary on that. Okay, where was I? Furthermore, each time others associate us in their minds with any of those feelings, we decrease the likelihood of their responding compassionately to our needs and values in the future. It is important here not to confuse value judgments and moralistic judgments. I think I already read this, but that's okay. All of us make value judgments as to the qualities we value in life. For example, we might value honesty, freedom, or peace, and value judgments reflect back our beliefs of how life can best be served. We make moralistic judgments of people and behaviors that fail to support our value judgments, like the violence is bad, that kind of thing. Okay, so I already read that. The relationship between language and violence is the subject of psychology professor O.J. Harvey's research at the University of Colorado. He took random samples of pieces of literature from many countries over the world and tabulated the frequency of the words that classify and judge people. This is interesting. His study shows a high correlation between the frequent use of such words that and indecencies, or wait, incidences. Such words and incidences. Oh, incidences. Wait, incidences. Oh my God, it did not look right. See what I mean? Not a big reader. Words and incidences. No, incidences. Yeah. Whoa. And I'm not stoned. Okay. Let me redo this. His study shows a high correlation between the frequent use of such words and incidences of violence. It does not surprise me to hear that there is considerably less violence in cultures where people think in terms of human needs than in cultures where people label one another as good or bad and believe that the bad ones deserve to be punished. In 75% of the television programs shown during hours when American children are most likely to be watching, the hero either kills people or beats them up. 75, hold on, I've got to go back on that. In 75% of the television programs shown during the hours when American children are most likely to be watching, the hero either kills people or beats them up. 75% of the time. Oh my God. This violence typically constitutes the climax of the show. Viewers, having been taught that bad guys deserve to be punished, take pleasure in watching this violence. At the root of much, if not all violence, whether verbal, psychological, or physical, whether among family members, tribes, or nations, is a kind of thinking that attributes the cause of conflict to wrongness in one's adversaries and a corresponding inability to think of oneself or others in terms of vulnerabilities, what one might be feeling, fearing, yearning for, missing, etc. We saw this dangerous way of thinking during the Cold War. Our leaders viewed Russians as an evil empire bent on destroying the American way of life. Russian leaders referred to the people of the United States as imperialistic oppressors who were trying to subjugate them. Neither side acknowledged the fear lurking behind such labels. So classifying and judging people promote violence. Making comparisons. Another form of judgment is the use of comparisons. In his book, How to Make Yourself Miserable, Dan Greenberg demonstrates through humor an insidious power that comparative thinking can exert over us. He suggests that if readers have a sincere desire to make life miserable for themselves, that they might learn to compare themselves to other people. For those unfamiliar with his practice or this practice, he provides a few exercises. The first one displays full-length pictures of a man and a woman who embody ideal physical beauty by contemporary media standards. Readers are instructed to take their own body measurements, compare them to those superimposed on the pictures of the attractive specimens, and then dwell on the differences. This exercise produces what it promises. We start to feel miserable as we engage in these comparisons. By the time that we are as depressed as we think possible, we turn the page to discover that the first exercise was a mere warm-up. Since physical beauty is relatively superficial, Greenberg now provides an opportunity to compare ourselves on something that matters, achievement. He resorts to the phone book to give readers a few random individuals to compare themselves with. The first name he claims to have pulled out of the phone book is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Greenberg lists the languages Mozart spoke and the major pieces that he had composed by the time he was a teenager. The exercise then instructs readers to recall their own achievements at their current stage of life, to compare them with what Mozart had accomplished by the age of 12, and to dwell on the differences. Even readers who never emerge from the self-induced misery of this exercise might see how powerfully this type of thinking blocks compassion, both for oneself and for others. Denial of responsibility. Another kind of life-alienating communication is the denial of responsibility. Life-alienating communication clouds our awareness that we are each responsible for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions. The use of the common expression have to, as in there are some things you have to do whether you like it or not, illustrates how personal responsibility for our actions is obscured in such speech. The phrase makes one feel, as in you make me feel guilty, is another example of how language facilitates the denial of personal responsibility for our own feelings and thoughts. In her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, which documents the war crimes trial of Nazi officer Adolf Eichmann, Hannah Arendt quotes Eichmann saying that he and his fellow officers had their own name for the responsibility denying language they used. They called it, I'm not going to say this right, AMTSSPRACHE at Prachi. I don't know what it is. Loosely, because it just doesn't seem like there's enough vowels. Loosely translated into English as office talk or bureaucratis with an ESE on there, like bureaucracy with an ESE on the end. For example, if asked why they took a certain action, the response might be, I had to. If asked why they had to, the answer would be superior's orders, company policy. It's the law. We deny responsibility for our actions when we attribute their cause to vague impersonal forces. I cleaned my room because I had to. Our condition, diagnosis, personal or psychological history. I drink because I'm an alcoholic. The actions of others. I hit my child because he ran into the street. The dictates of authority. I lied to the client because the boss told me to. Group pressure. I started smoking because all my friends did. Institutional politics, rules and regulations. I have to suspend you for this infraction because it's the school policy. Gender roles, social roles, or age roles. I hate going to work, but I do it because I'm a husband and a father. Uncontrollable impulses. I was overcome by my urge to eat the candy bar. Once during a discussion among parents and teachers on the dangers of a language that implies absence of choice, a woman objected angrily, but there are some things that you have to do whether you like it or not. And I see nothing wrong with telling my children that there are things that they have to do. Telling my children there are things that they have to do too. Asked for an example of something she had to do, she retorted, "That's easy. When I leave here tonight, I have to go home and cook. I hate cooking. I hate it with a passion, but I have been doing it every day for 20 years, even when I've been as sick as a dog, because it's one of those things you just have to do." I told her I was sad to hear her spending so much of her life doing something that she hated because she felt compelled to, and hoped that she might find happier possibilities by learning the language of NVC. I am pleased to report that she was a rapid student. At the end of the workshop, she actually went home and announced to her family that she no longer wanted to cook. The opportunity for some feedback from her family came 3 weeks later when her two sons arrived at a workshop. I was curious to know how they had reacted to the mother's announcement. The elder son sighed. "Marshall, I just said to myself, thank God. Seeing my mom puzzled looked." He explained, "I thought to myself, maybe finally she won't be complaining at every meal." Another time when I was consulting for a school district, a teacher remarked, "I hate giving grades. I don't think that they're helpful, and I think they create a lot of anxiety on the part of the students. But I have to give grades. It's the district policy." We had just been practicing how to introduce language in the classroom that heightens consciousness and responsibility for one's actions. I suggested that the teacher translate the statement, "I have to give grades because it's district policy," to "I choose to give grades because I want." Oh, so good. I choose because I want. 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 That's something I definitely want to circle. I choose because I want statements. Oh, so good. It's confusing choice and free will, and it's focusing you on what's wanted. Love this. Okay. So she answered without hesitation, "I choose to give grades because I want to keep my job." You could see how it could have been, "I choose to give the grades because I don't want to lose my job." Do you see that? Like how easy it is to turn that around based on our conditioning, and how now we can be able to like notice, I'm choosing to do this because I want. And it frames it in a way that is fueling all the energy toward choice, free will, and the wanted. Oh my God, just if anyone just only remembers this part, I can't imagine how much this could possibly change your life. It's changed my life. The more that I remember to do it, I don't do it all the time, still working on it all the time, but the more I work on it, the more I notice, the more I turn over to that, the more I see the reflection in my external reality coming back to me with the adjustment. So it's possible. "But I don't like saying it that way. It makes me feel so responsible for what I'm doing," she said. "That's why I want you to do it that way." Or he goes, "That's why I want you to do it that way," she replied. So it's self-empowering. We are dangerous when we are not conscious of our responsibility for how we behave, think, and feel. I share the sentiments of French novelist and journalist Georges Bernanos when he says, "I have thought for a long time now that if someday the increasingly efficiency for the technique of destruction finally causes our species to disappear from the earth, it will not be cruelty that will be responsible for our extinction, and still less, of course, the indignation that cruelty awakens and the reprisals and vengeance that it brings upon itself, but the docility, the lack of responsibility of the modern man, his base subservient acceptance of every common decree, The horrors that we have seen, the still greater horrors we shall presently see, are not signs that rebels, insubordinate, untamable men are increasing in numbers throughout the world, but rather that there is a constant increase in the number of obedient, docile men. Ooh. Wow. Yeah, that's big. Other forms of life alienating communication. Communicating our desires as demands is another form of language that blocks compassion. A demand explicitly or implicitly threatens listeners with blame or punishment if they fail to comply. It is a common form of communication in our culture, especially among those who hold positions of authority. My children gave me some invaluable lessons about demands. Somehow I had gotten into my own head that as a parent, my job was to make demands. I learned, however, that I could make all the demands in the world, but I still couldn't make the children do anything. This is a humbling lesson in power for those of us who believe that, because we're a parent, teacher, or manager, our job is to change other people and to make them behave. Here were these youngsters letting me know that I couldn't make them do anything. All I could do was make them wish that they had through punishment. Then eventually they taught me that anytime I was foolish enough to make them wish they had complied by punishing them, that they had ways of making me wish that I hadn't. Right? That's reactivity right there. It's like when we do that, then the other goes back and forth forever. We will examine this subject again when we learn to differentiate requests from demands, an important part of NVC. Life alienating communication is also associated with the concept that certain actions merit reward while others merit punishment. This thinking is expressed by the word deserve, as in he deserves to be punished for what he did. It assumes badness on the part of the people who behave in certain ways and calls for punishment to make them repent and change their behavior. I believe it is in everyone's interest that people change, not in order to avoid punishment, but because they see the change as benefiting themselves. I'm going to repeat that. I believe it is in everyone's interest that people change, not in order to avoid punishment, but because they see the change as benefiting themselves. Oh, so good. Most of us grew up speaking a language that encourages us to label, compare, demand, and pronounce judgments rather than to be aware of what we were feeling and needing. I believe life alienating communication is rooted in views of human nature that have exerted their influence for several centuries. These views stress our innate evil and deficiency and a need for education to control our inherently undesirable nature. Such education often leaves us questioning whether there is something wrong with whatever feelings and needs we may be experiencing. We learn early to cut ourselves off from what is going on within ourselves. This is shadow work. When we cut ourselves off for all of that conditioning, we turn off from our feelings and can't even find out what our needs are. And even if we did find a need, we immediately are programmed to go to the why we can't have the need, why we shouldn't, why we're not deserving of the need. Which it is true that we can't make somebody fulfill a need for us, that is their free will, but in turn, it is also totally okay for us to have that need and for us to find what our needs are. We are led in by our emotional experience. Okay. Life alienating communication both stems from and supports hierarchical or domination societies, where large populations are controlled by a small number of individuals for their own benefit. It would be to the interest of kings, czars, nobles, etc., that the masses be educated in a way that renders them slave-like in mentality. The language of wrongness, should, and have tos is perfectly suited for this purpose. The more people who are trained to think in terms of moralistic judgments that apply wrongness and badness, the more that they are being trained to look outside of themselves to outside authorities for the definition of what constitutes right and wrong and good and bad. When we think of the news, all it's doing is like, we think from this news channel that this is bad, this is wrong, this is bad, and you should be outraged. We think on this channel that they're wrong and that they're bad and this is bad and making you feel like crap. And then in between all of it, let's give you a segment of things that will make you feel better and talk about all of the medical problems that you probably have from watching news the whole time, right? That's just like how it feeds in itself. Okay. The language of wrongness, should, and have to is perfectly suited for this purpose. The more people are trained to think in terms of moralistic judgments that imply wrongness and badness, the more that they are being trained to look outside themselves, to outside authorities for the definition of what constitutes right, wrong, good, and bad. When we are in contact with our feelings and needs, we humans no longer make good slaves and underlings. Summary: it is in our nature to enjoy giving and receiving compassionately. We have, however, learned many forms of life alienating communication that leads us to speak and believe in ways that injure others and ourselves. From one form of life alienating communication to the use of moralistic judgments that imply wrongness or badness on the part of those who don't act in harmony with our values. Another form of such communication is the use of comparisons, which can block compassion both for others and ourselves. Life alienating communication also obscures our awareness that we are each responsible for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions. Communicating our desires in the form of demands is yet another characteristic of language that blocks compassion. And that is the end of chapter 2. I will be doing chapter 3 in just a moment. So go ahead, get yourself some water, do some jumping jacks, stretch a little, stim a little if you're following along, and I'll meet you in a moment for chapter 3. Bye.